Hi, this is Andre Hurst with the Lafayette Historical Society's Oral History Project, and I'm joined by Chris Young. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Let's
Love
start out,
talking about
Chris, with
Lafayette. Yeah.
your history in Lafayette, when you arrived, where you lived. Why don't we start there?
Okay. Well, let's see. I was born in 1950 in Stockton while my parents were still going to school there at the then College of the Pacific. And then we moved to Lafayette, as far as I can tell, right after I was born. I don't have any actual records, but I know our house was being built and we moved in March of 51 on Lost Palace. And that's where I grew up with my two brothers and sister.
Nice. What was the address there?
700 Lost Palace.
So that's in Burton Valley.
Hmm.
What was Burton Valley like back then? Was it before it was developed or was it being developed?
It was, boy, it was being developed. Lost Palace, there were a few empty lots. There was an empty lot next to ours that had a pear orchard in it for the longest time. And then somebody bought the property and built a nice house on that. But we, as kids, we used to play there. As my parents used to host an Easter egg hunt, and we have one in that orchard and one in our backyard. The orchard was for the older kids, and the backyard was for the younger kids. And
Oh, what a good
the one thing I,
idea.
yeah,
How
what
big
one
was
thing I
that
remember,
orchard? Do you remember?
it was a house plot size, so quarter acre, quarter to a little, maybe not quite a half an acre, but yeah, full of old pear trees. I mean, pear trees look old anyway, but
Yeah.
um, and then
Did you ever ride your bike down to where the train
oh
would?
yeah, well, the train, the train ran, which is now where the Moraga Lafayette Moraga Trail is. That was the right of way, and it was behind my neighbors across the street, so it was behind their house. So nobody had fences back then, so we just walked through, the yards of all of our neighbors. So if we wanted to see the train, or we could see it from our house between homes, but we walk over there, and they sort of had a fence to keep people from walking across the tracks, but that got knocked down years ago. And then behind that were walnut orchards. There was lots of walnut orchards around. Um, and behind our house, nobody had fences, so we could walk from my house all the way up to Glenside Circle, which is like diagonally opposite the little, Lost Palace bisected Glenside. So we could, as kids, we walked all over back there, and there were lots of kids in the neighborhood. Everybody had two, three, or four kids. So we could field a couple of football teams or baseball teams in our, and that we play baseball in the backyards of somebody's house, or front yards. So
So, it sounds like a idyllic childhood in terms of just having that kind of freedom.
yeah, we didn't know. Of course, that's where we grew up. We didn't know any different, but of course now everybody's got fences and you can't travel. You can't, as I say, travel. But yeah, it was just everybody. It was back in the day where you came home when it was dark. It was nobody had watches. Nobody, the
For
kids just
dinner,
play.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Or one of the neighbors had, and they had a big bell out in their backyard, and if the kids knew, if they heard that bell, it was time to come home. And then the rest of us kind of go, I go, okay, the summers have to
Let's
go home. I guess we got to go home too. So that's the way
tell
it
me a little
was.
about your family, the names of your parents and when they were born, if you remember. And
Uh-huh.
if I guess you all moved to Lafayette around 1950. Is that what I'm hearing?
1950. Yeah.
Okay. Your
Uh,
brothers or sisters, their
sure.
names and
So
birthdays.
my dad was Fletcher Young, born in 1924. Everybody called him Fletch. That was that was what he called him. Everybody, that's the name, his nickname. Excuse me. My mother was Carolyn. She was born in 1926, and everybody called her Carolyn. It was just, that. And then I have the two brothers, Marshall, whom we called Mush, there's a long story that goes on like how he inherited that name, that nickname. Excuse me for a second. And then my brother David, and my sister Terry, or Therese is her full name, but we all called
So
her
there are
Terry.
four of you, and what was the order in terms of oldest to youngest?
I was the oldest. As myself I'm the oldest. Then Marshall, David, and Terry was the youngest.
Are they still alive, and do any of
Yeah.
them live in Lafayette?
Say they are alive. My Mush lives in up near Sacramento, Rancho Cordova. David lives in Park City, Utah, and Terry lives in Walnut Creek.
So you're still in Lafayette?
Yep, I live over in the
Are
Lafayette Valley
you still
Estates.
living in the family home?
No, we sold that. Unfortunately, none of us could afford to buy it, so we sold it in. Let's see, when my dad passed away in 2010, and we sold it in 2013.
Okay.
And my mom passed away in 1998.
So you lived in that home a very long time.
Yeah,
Well,
well, it was my dad lived in there for quite some time, and then he died from complications of dementia, and so he was in an assisted living facility, and my oldest daughter lived in the house until we sold it,
okay.
and so yeah, it was in the family for quite some time.
And your family now, tell me about your family.
Well, my family, well, I'm married, be 49 years this September. I have three children. Um, uh, my oldest is Shanda, that's Shanda. She actually lives in Lafayette. Um, my son, Evan, lives in Seattle, and my youngest daughter, Catherine, lives in uh, Vacaville. She has three children. We have the three grandchildren. My son and his partner adopted a little baby girl. So, and then, uh,
Nice.
yeah. So,
Great. Um, Now you have some history with Sunshine Cleaners. Why don't we go
yes,
there?
yeah, yeah. So my parents, or my dad and my mom, um, my dad, worked for a couple different companies and things, and then they decided to go into the coin-operated laundromat and dry cleaning business back in 1963. And 62, 63. And so they opened up what we then called Sunshine Cleaners on Golden Gate Way, right next door to the then Pioneer Market. Um, and just down the street from the Park Theater. And they actually opened two. They had two of them, one in Lafayette, and then they later on, and a couple of years later, they opened up one in Walnut Creek. And for the most part, it worked out okay. My dad was very, very, very handy. He could do electrical, mechanical, plumbing. And so he did a lot of the maintenance himself, which saved them money. But it was a lot of upkeep. And the coin operated dry cleaning as a concept was okay, except people didn't understand. They thought dry cleaning was you put something in a cabinet and it dry, and it came out dry, but somehow it was clean. But it's not. That's not the process. It just means it's cleaning without water. It uses chemicals and solvents, and so people didn't understand that. So we had to have somebody there to kind of show them how to do that. And after a while, they come in and say, "Well, can you do it for me?" And so okay. And then one thing led to another, and we ended up, the coin operated part of the dry cleaning business, disappeared, and they ended up, having a full time operator there to manage that. And then my dad, which was my dad was part of that as well. Then people wanted, the closed press, so we started putting in steam presses and all that finishing work. So that became part of it. And then the coin operated laundry just was more trouble than it was worth.
Sure.
So
Well, I
in
imagine, so that was 1950s, 60s, 70s. Is that roughly how
yeah,
long did the business run?
they sold it in 87, so that we were open for 26, 27 years. And by then it was a full service dry cleaning, no laundromat at all, though we did take in shirts and stuff like that, but that was, and I worked there all through high school, junior college, and then I come home from college and run the place for them if they wanted to take a week on off or something.
Mm-hmm.
My brothers sort of worked there. My sister kind of, but my dad taught me how to do all the maintenance, so I could tear washing machines apart or dry cleaning machines apart and put them back together, change out bearings, things like that. So very
And
mechanical.
and that was
Uh,
sort of during a time when people really liked to go to work with a, you know, I remember my dad would come home with his dry cleaning, and
mhm.
it's not as popular these days, but back then it was very popular, wasn't it?
Well, people bought clothing for the style and how it looked, and and the fabrics were okay. It was just wool or whatever, and they didn't understand that you can't just throw it on a washing machine and
Right.
clean stuff because wool
Yeah.
would shrink and things like that. So dry cleaning doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Suits. We get Lafayette's full of business people that are commuters, so people were wearing suits, and so those needed to be dry cleaned. You just can't put those in a washing machine. So that the business did well. Um, my mom went down and started working the counter and doing the spotting, and we all learned how to do finishing, how to press clothes and things like that, and that was kind of fun in the summer when it was hot and steamy. But
Mhm.
anyway, um, we uh, but it was like the family farm.
Sure.
Everybody just kind of chipped in, and that's how they did it. And they retired in the 80s. Um, Sold it to a family that, or a husband and wife, and he passed away a few years later. And it's now Hamlin Cleaners, which was down at the other end of Golden Gate Way. They bought the place and moved in, and so that the location of the current Hamlin Cleaners is where the Sunshine Cleaners was. And they did, and
Mhm.
as far as I know, the equipment in there is still the same.
Huh.
May have upgraded it a little bit, but I walked in there once or twice, um, and it still looks the same, with a few upgrades.
Tell us a little bit about your early memories of what Lafayette was like.
Boy, I used to describe Lafayette as I remember when it only had one stoplight in town, which is right at Mount Diablo and Moraga Road, right by Safeway there. That's how far back I can remember, at least in terms of what the downtown was. There were gas stations. There was Lafayette Pharmacy, which is now Starbucks, next to the Roundup. Gosh, there's just the bus used to come through town, and there was an A&W root beer place at one end of now, where I think it used to be called Scotty Rents. I forget what it's called now. There's equipment rental place in that location. And the post office was on the corner of First and Mount Diablo Boulevard. It was, for the store, that's what we called Sunshine Cleaners. Was in the family we call it the store. So it was convenient to, if we had to do mailing, you just walk up the street and go to the mailbox, or the lots of banks were close by. There was a hardware store where I think it's Petco is now. So if my dad needed a piece of a nut or bolt or something like that, he just walk up there and get it. It was just, there was lots of conveniences in town, um, all within walking distance, or short drives. All those have disappeared. Um, but that goes back to early memories, going to nursery school. Went to Lafayette Nursery School, which bounced around to a couple of different locations.
Mhm.
We were in the basement of then the Masonic, which is now where the library is, Masonic Hall. Then they built a permanent one, um, by the time I graduated from there, and then went. I think, you mentioned the Sacramento Northern Railroad used to run through town, following the current La Mirinda or Lafayette Moraga bike trail.
Trail. Could
That's
you
yeah.
could you hear the train, and how often did that go through? How much of a part of the sense of
Boy,
the character of the town was it?
it hauled freight, it hauled passengers. It was an electric train. So it had that little spring thing on the top of the train. So you didn't hear a chug chugging. It just, you could hear it rumbling past the neighbors across the street, but it really didn't make a lot of noise.
Interesting.
And there was a trestle that we used to play on as kids, or a bridge that ran right next to what's the current Los Trampas pool.
Is that where that nice footbridge is now?
Yes, there's a footbridge there now. Yeah, that was a big train trestle, and as little
Wow.
kids, we'd climb all over that, and we'd play in the creek. And the older kids would say, "There's a boogeyman that lives in the creek. You got to be careful." And and us little kids would go on big wide
Did you
eye.
ever think you would see the train disappear or the tracks disappear?
Well, as a kid, I didn't know any better. It stopped running, I want to say 57, 58, so I was old enough. The tracks didn't get torn up for many years. I used to walk the railroad tracks to get to school, go to Burton School, which is now the Lafayette Community Center. That's where I went to elementary school, and then just walk along the old railroad tracks.
So
Tried to ride my bicycle, which was a challenge because of the bumps. But we could do it.
I bet people rode their horses along that route.
Yeah, there were people that had horses in the neighborhood. A family down the street, 2 doors down, the Summers, their oldest daughter, I can't remember her name now. They built a horse barn behind their house, right between the house and the railroad track. And she had at least 2 horses, as I remember. God, I'm trying to think of her name. It's escaping me at this point. But yeah, I mean, there was kids were on bikes. The cars didn't have seat belts.
What about the all the creeks in town, and the wildlife? What was that like? Birds and different.
Yeah, we you'd see the occasional raccoon, deer. There were, now we see crows and turkeys. And in my neighborhood, I live in Lafayette Valley Estates now, and I've been there for 38 years, 39 years. And you can hear the turkeys and the coyotes around. I don't remember those as kids. The crows, don't remember those at all. We even got a peacock that hollers at night in our neighborhood. So that was, we didn't see a lot of that. They pretty much stayed. The creek was a good place, but there was a lot of open space too. The hills, we used to call the cow hills because that's where the cows roamed. Behind our house, there was a house, and then Glenside Drive, and then a house behind that. And then there were just big open grass hills. And as kids, we used to get pieces of cardboard and slide down those hills and get all sorts of, road rash or abrasions. But that was fun as a kid. I mean, some guys took it to the next step, and they actually, made specific slides they'd wax up they look like snow slides, and they go as fast as they could down the hill, and of course they'd roll over, they get their faces all scraped up and stuff. But that was as kids, everybody got scraped up and nobody thought anything about it.
Now, when you got a little bit older, do you remember going to the theater, or what did you do for entertainment, let's say in your teen years?
Well, I can start with my preteen years. As little kids, the Lafayette Theater, Park Theater, was the place to go. I mean, they took you, the parents would drive by, drop you off, give you a quarter to get in, and 10 cents for something to, you know, for candy or whatever. And that was an afternoon. And if it was a double feature, that was even, you know, better for the family, for my parents, because they didn't have to deal with us for that length of time. One thing about the Park Theater that I always remember is in the early days, if it was like between features or between a cartoon or something like that, the owner of the theater would get down and there was like a little stage in the front. He'd get down and he would tell everybody about what's coming next week or the next couple of weeks. So that was, instead of, you know, having previews, he would tell everybody what it was to get them all excited about. Okay, we got this new science fiction movie, you know, Target Earth, and it's really exciting. It's got this and that and other things. And the kids would go, yeah, yeah, okay. So we got, and of course, parents, you know, we tell the parents, yeah, we want to go next week. Okay, okay. So that was, you know, but the Park Theater was always a place to go. As we got older and could travel a little more, we went over to the Ream Theater and the Orinda Theater. Occasionally we go into Walnut Creek to the El Rey Theater. But those were the big things. Lafayette Theater, you know, Park Theater was the place to go.
Sure.
And I'm glad they're saving it. I've talked to the people that are working on that, and it's worth it. It's a landmark.
Oh, yeah.
It's part
Yeah.
of the history of Lafayette. In fact, when I was the church that I go to, which I'm currently sitting in, St. Anselm's Church, before the church was built in 1960-61, services were held in the Park Theater. And then it kind of bounced around. There was a Park Theater, there was a mortuary in town that we had services in. While the church was being built, I was baptized in the rectories, in the garage behind the church. That's where our rector lived while the church was being built. That's another memory. I spent, you know, my youth as an acolyte here, and I still raise my kids here, baptize my kids here. So it's multi-generational. But then I'm just trying to think back at some of the other stuff that we, you know, my
What
teen
about the
years.
town hall theater? Were there ever things going on there that you enjoyed doing?
The basement was used a lot for my preschool was in there before they built the permanent one. Um, Sunday school classes were held in there in the basement. Actually, going to the theater, I didn't start going to the theater till I was an adult. Um, um, the town hall building itself went through several iterations of different things, but um, you know, again, that's another thing that's been around forever.
Yeah.
The Masonic building across the street, same thing. I, you know, remember going there a couple of times. Again, nursery school in the basement. We bounced around a lot.
Sure.
Trying to think of other places in town. You know, it was thing about working for my folks and the cleaners is I get to know a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
People knew me by name. I didn't necessarily know them, but they know I was associated with the store. Everybody knew my mom and dad, and it's still, you know, I run into occasionally say, "Oh, I remember your mom. You know, she was so nice." And you know, mom got involved with school. She was, you know, back then they had room moms that did things for the teacher. My
Hmm.
mom was always doing that for all four of us kids as we were growing up. Um, Boy, I started getting into my teen years. Boy, that was, I was in Scouts, part of Troop 204, which has the log cabin next to Lafayette School.
Sure.
Um,
Still there.
it's still there. My son, and I got my Eagle there. My son went through there, got his Eagle there too. Up until about 2, 3 years ago, well, actually COVID was when things stopped, but I used to go back every year and teach him how to do snow camping. And but that's something I did. I did a lot of outdoorsy stuff. I
Snow
still do. And
camping. So did you go up towards Tahoe to do that?
yep, yeah, we did that around, yeah, different places up in the mountain, up, you know, around Lake Tahoe or up Highway 4.
Hmm.
But Yeah, those are fond memories.
What are your favorite landmarks that are still here when you drive by that still bring back memories and say to you, yeah, this is Lafayette?
Boy, well, certainly 204 cabin. I drive by it all the time, and that has lots and lots of memories there. Boy, I don't, I drive occasionally. I go down Golden Gate Way and by the store, and because it says Hamlin there, and it's been there long enough that most people don't remember that it was Sunshine Cleaners. I kind of sigh about that. The Great Wall Chinese place was the Pioneer Market when I was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
The Lombardos that owned the place, they also owned the building that the store was in, and the apartments above. And as a kid, I remember I come home from school, go down to work at the store. I'd go next door and get something to eat or whatever. But the Lombardo, I missed them. They were a great couple. Gosh,
And
I
then
still, I go
And then
ahead.
when the BART came in, I guess in the 70s, right?
Hmm.
That was right around you were, in your 20s. Was that exciting for you then to be able to easily get into San Francisco and places?
Yeah, it was actually when I got married. We lived in apartments, that backed up to the BART line, a half a block away or couple blocks away from the BART station. I used to take that to when I was going to graduate school at UC Berkeley. That was always easy, didn't have to drive. I just took BART, which made it really convenient. But yeah, when I started my work career, when I came out of graduate school, I worked on Pier 39 in San Francisco. And so I take BART into the San Francisco day and read the paper and Herb Caen and all
Nice.
that
What
stuff.
was your line of work?
I was a project manager, senior project manager, operations manager for general contractors. The one I started with was called Swinnerton and Wahlberg. I left, came back years later. It was then just called Swinnerton Builders.
Oh,
So
yes, I've heard of
cumulative,
it.
yeah, cumulative. I worked for them for 29, 30 years and retired 3 years ago from
Did you
them.
ever do any big projects in Lafayette, or were they mostly
No,
San Francisco?
no, well, I did most of my work was in San Francisco, did several projects there. As far north as Santa Rosa, far south is Los Gatos. Actually, take that back. Be Santa Cruz, let's see, Bakersfield, and then I worked over in Hawaii for 7 months. Worked in Colorado at a plutonium research and development site called Rocky Flats. Um, So I did a lot of high rises, hotels, hospitals, university projects. I built the first academic building at UC Merced. So I, had the opportunity to do a lot of. Fortunate that I worked mostly in the Bay Area.
Do you
And,
think Lafayette has done a pretty good job zoning and just maintaining the character of the town over the years, or
Boy, don't get me started.
maybe that's a
Bec
loaded question, huh?
it
This is,
it
after all, a
is.
historical oral history
Yeah,
interview,
it
but
is.
still.
Yeah, the ambiance of the town has changed. Um, there's a few of us that still, some of my closest friends, and my closest friend, we remember the days when it was, it was just a nice quiet town, like say a one stoplight town. Um, Now it's just gotten so big, and you know, the the ambiance has gotten a little more. It's not the community where people were, said hi to you and were friendly to you and you knew everybody. I mean, it was a small town. It was a bedroom community for the, those that commuted to San Francisco or went other places to work. I mean, it was a combination of blue collar and white collar. Not too much blue collar anymore. It's pretty much all white collar. And I mean, the neighborhood, the house that we're living in, what we paid for it and what it's worth now is like, it's crazy. And then people are fighting each other to try to get into our neighborhoods because of the school systems, which again, we took for granted. And yes, I raised my kids in the same school system, and they came out okay.
Yep.
Um, but I miss the localness of it.
Sure.
And I reminisce with my, the friends that I still, keep in touch with, about, the good old days, that kind of thing. But
Do you have a group of people that, for your reunions and things like that, that still live here?
a few people that I went to high school with still live in the area. I had been active in the Del Valle High School class of '68 class reunion. I've been doing that. We did the 40th, the 45th, 50th, and 55th, so 20 years. And it's fun to see some of the people and where they've gone, but a lot of people just moved out. They didn't stick around. I'm an oddity. I have to say, at least I feel like I am at times, but that I still live here. Never thought I'd end up buying a place here and raising my kids here.
Yeah.
My
Do you
my
think you'll
wife's,
stay? Do you think you'll stay now for the duration?
yeah, yeah, because that's we're adding on. I raised 3 kids with a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house. And we're now adding can't say master anymore. It's
Large bedroom.
a large bedroom. Yes. Another bath and a walk and stuff like that. And, we added more square footage, because this is where we're going to spend the rest of our lives. That's my way my
That's
wife and I
great.
look at it. So, and we brought a
Well,
place for the grandkids to come.
we have around 2 minutes left on this Zoom before it
I
disappears. We
see
can
that.
continue this if you like, or we can have one more question and wrap it up. What do you think?
Well, we can do one more question. I'm just looking at my list here of things that I think I've covered all the stuff. All the schools or names have been closed, and yeah, it looks like yeah. If you've got another question, go for it. I've gone through, I think, everything that I wanted to touch
Did
on.
we ask your wife's name?
No. Her name is, she goes by Peggy. That's all and I didn't know that she had her name was really Margaret until I dating her for about a year and a half. Um, and yeah, we've
And
been married.
did you meet in college or high school or?
I was going to Cal Poly at the time. I sang in the men's glee club, and we were on a music tour. And her best friend was dating somebody in the glee club. They got invited to the after concert party, and I met her there, and we got to talking, and one thing led to another. And
And then you said, "Let's get married, move to Lafayette."
well, it wasn't quite that easy because I was going to graduate school at the time,
Sure.
and so I that when I was going to the grad school, that was tough. We ended up started at UC Berkeley, ended up in Oregon, and then we bounced around. We moved like every year for a couple of years, for one reason or another, and then we ended up buying here in Lafayette. And then since retirement, I went back to school and got a PhD. So it's like
How about
crazy,
that?
crazy
Well,
stuff
thank
here.
you so much for the time today and for sharing
Uh,
your story
oh, you're
about living in
welcome.
Lafayette and your memories. I know
Thank
a lot
you.
of people will enjoy listening to this, and it will be going up on the Lafayette Historical Society website. So let us know
Sweet.
if you have any other memories you'd like to share. Otherwise, hope you have a really good day.
I probably do. And, you get me talking, I could probably come up with lots more stuff. But you asked a lot of really good questions about what it was like to grow up here and still live here. So
Yeah.
I love the place. And I
Okay.
love talking about it. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank
And
you.
I look forward to hearing it. So
Okay, very good. Take care.
you too. Bye bye now.
Bye.